Good morning, everyone. Before I get into the details of my third annual report, I want to acknowledge that this land is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Today, I am pleased to present the third annual report of the French Language Services Commissioner tabled by the Office of the Ombudsman of Ontario. We've accomplished a great deal since May 1st, 2019. We handled over 1,000 cases, the vast majority of which have been resolved. We issued 9 recommendations in 2 annual reports and 19 recommendations in our special investigation into the cuts to French language programs by Laurentian University. I have visited Francophones all over the province and met with hundreds of people to hear about the obstacles that they face and how my team and I can help remedy them. I thank all of you who contacted us, and I invite each and every one of you who are listening today to contact us if you are facing a lack of services in French. I also thank the media for the interest they've shown in our work throughout the year and for your presence here today. I believe that 3 years is a good time to start assessing how far we've come and to look to the future. And that's exactly what I do in this report. And what I've seen makes me optimistic. We've had great cooperation from the government, civil service, agencies, and officers of the Legislature in resolving the vast majority of the cases we handled this year and those we have dealt with since May 1st, 2019. Ontario now has driver's license and health cards that allow for French characters such as accents. These are long-standing issues, and the lack of such characters presented challenges that we've helped resolve. The government is now working to apply all my recommendations and has finished implementing 2 of the 9 recommendations I made in my 2 annual reports. Indeed, the government now issues bilingual Amber Alerts, and in April, the Minister of Francophone Affairs presented her first annual report to the Legislature on her ministry's work and plans to support the Francophone community. I also received a report on the regulations on the subject of active offer. And I've received an update from Laurentian University, the Ministry of Colleges and Universities, and the Ministry of Francophone Affairs on the progress regarding the 19 recommendations I presented in my reports on cuts to Laurentian University. I noted that there will be an evaluation policy before making any changes that may impact its designation. The Ministry of Francophone Affairs are working on updating the evaluation policy and establishing a compliance protocol. I've also noted that the Ministry of Colleges and Universities is drafting an internal policy that will strengthen the role of the coordinator of French language services. We've helped solve 2 major issues for Ontario Francophones. However, much more work needs to be done. For example, in my 2019-2020 report, I recommended to the government that all of its ministries, some 30 of them, set up a plan for the provision of services in French by April 1st, 2022. While this timeline has not been met by the government, I keep getting indications that such plans are in development. And I have indeed good reason to think such plans are being drafted. That's why this year I've identified the importance of continuing to prioritize the implementation of my recommendations presented in my first 2 annual reports to ensure that the province can rely on robust planning of its French language services and can evaluate its effectiveness. This year, we've received 277 new cases. Many of them are related to service planning. Let me give you an example. A man shared with us his family's experience after their dying mother, was admitted to a designated hospital in Northern Ontario. On several occasions, he and his family were unable to obtain services in French when visiting their mother. They noticed that their mother received very few services in French and even found a note that asked her to, quote, please speak in English. Their mother died a few weeks after being admitted to the hospital. As a result of our intervention, an action plan was developed by the hospital to prevent such a situation ever happening again. So planning remains an issue, and I will continue to monitor the government's progress in this regard. The cases we've handled have also led us to identify areas where improvements are needed. One such area is recruitment for bilingual positions. In particular, the way the government communicates its employment opportunities to the public in French. The established practice has seen that only positions designated as bilingual, therefore requiring French language skills, are communicated in French to the public. By posting only designated bilingual positions in French, the government does not communicate all of its employment opportunities to Francophones in their language. We have noted, however, that the government is seeking to attract more Francophones and professionals with French language skills. I therefore recommend that the Treasury Board Secretariat should review the Ontario Public Service Employment Policy to ensure that job postings in French are not limited to designated bilingual positions. The cases we've dealt with have also led us to identify issues related to Regulation 398/93, which lists designated government agencies in Ontario. The designation list contains a great deal of information that is now obsolete and sometimes makes it impossible to determine whether or not some organizations are required to offer services in French. Designation is essential in this province. It makes it possible to increase the availability of French language services across Ontario's public sectors. It's through this process that eligible organizations can voluntarily opt for government-recognized obligations to provide services in French. Designation allows for reliable and quality services in French. It's really crucial for Francophones to know where French language services are available in their regions, and the tool that provides them with this information, Regulation 398/93, must be up to date. I therefore recommend that by September 30th, 2023, the Ministry of Francophone Affairs develop a plan addressed to the Commissioner to update Regulation 398/93. I'm confident that my recommendations will pave the way for improvements in the delivery of French language services and will lead to thoroughgoing changes for Francophones in Ontario. Although we still have much work to do, this report documents important progress in the level of services in French in Ontario over the past year. I'd be happy to answer your questions. On the number of complaints, We looked at this at the briefing session, but why have there been fewer complaints this year? What explains this drop? We've dealt with 277 cases. That's about the average number of cases that we receive each year. If you look at the last 3 years, it's more than 1,000, and we've solved those cases. I'm not worried about the number of complaints. It's actually not the number of complaints, it's rather the quality of the outcome, the quality of the solution that we're able to find. You say that it's that the response you've had from the public, the civil service, have been positive. I'm not sure if the response of the different public bodies is as positive as you say. Well, I would say that in fact the government is very attentive to the work that we do, and their response is, if you look at the impact of those two complaints, it's very important. The report was just tabled yesterday, and the new regulation does indeed seem to respond to many of the recommendations I made. On the whole question on the active offer, if you step back and look at the response to our recommendations in the first year, what the minister said yesterday is in very many ways, an excellent response to those recommendations around active offer. And so I'm very optimistic. And so I see that the public service, the civil service, and the government as such have actually responded very positively. And all our recommendations were accepted after I tabled them. Followed up by what we saw yesterday. Sometimes you need a bit of time. We need a bit of time to assess the impact of the regulation on active offer. But what I've seen so far is actually very encouraging. So on the whole question of Laurentian University, it seems to be a matter of the interpretation of the Act. They seem to have a very narrow interpretation with respect to their obligations. In the report, we see that there are agencies that have changed their name or that no longer exist. Do you at all fear that an agency might be designated, but its name has changed or its work has changed? So they might say, well, our name has changed, or we don't do the same work as before, so we're no longer obliged to comply with our obligations. I don't want to speculate about what might happen, but what has happened at Laurentian University, what did happen is that there was a clear lack of clarity around the significant designation of a post-secondary institution. As for the regulation, which is the case for the relevant regulation, there is a list of agencies and bodies that no longer exist or their names have changed, listed under Regulation 398/93. And what this means that the Francophone community can't really know where services are supposed to be offered. The main concern I have is the risk of a lack or a loss of services. And this is in fact what happened at Laurentian University. A lack of clarity led to a loss of services, which had really a devastating impact of Laurentian students. But there may also be a risk that such and such hospital does not provide services, that such and such hospital or in such and such agency it does not comply with requirements because it has an outdated interpretation of the law. The whole goal of my recommendation is that the government should evaluate the regulation, update it so that everyone is properly informed of what agencies are designated, and more importantly, that these agencies should know what obligations they have to comply with based on the regulation. So back to the Regulation 398, Regulation 398/93. How can it be that the list is outdated in 2022? Is the ministry not doing its work? Is it? Well, it hasn't been updated since 1996. So the list just isn't being updated. Yes, we can see what's happened with respect to those bodies and agencies initially designated. One very important thing to say is that the list is very important. The regulation is very important. It designates which agencies have to offer services. And my recommendation is to ensure that this list is cleaned up so we have a clear idea of what agencies are designated and what their obligations are under this designation. Are Francophones somewhat vulnerable or exposed? Does it mean that their rights can't be upheld if this list hasn't been updated? Such and such agency has changed its name or has been merged with some other organization. Does this mean that Francophones are therefore rather vulnerable, rather exposed? We need updated laws and regulations so the general population knows what's going on and knows who is to provide what services, where, and so forth. And my hope is that my recommendation will settle this. The fact of the matter is that Francophones do contact us when they don't receive the French language services they're supposed to. And I also invite Francophones to contact us. If services are not being provided in French where they're supposed to be, get in touch. And then we have to determine whether the body in question, the agency in question, is indeed obliged to provide French language services. You talked about a hospital where a woman was told to speak in English. Does this raise the question of staff in designated agencies, designated organization? Is there a need for awareness raising among English speakers? Well, I would say that awareness raising around language rights and obligations flowing from the French Language Services Act is essential. My recommendation in my first year pointed out that there's a lack of knowledge and skills of staff. Here's someone who can provide French language services. This is what services that should be provided. What is the plan to make sure that there are indeed staff members, employees, able to assist an organization in complying with its obligation? Also have an ongoing dialogue with the Francophone community to ensure that services are provided, what services are needed, that qualified staff are hired. There's this whole discussion around modernization of the French Language Services Act, but what we often hear in the community is that, okay, well, that's very well and good, but there's a lack of mechanisms to react when agencies, organizations do not comply with their obligations. Well, what can be done? Well, over time, we'll see how the role of the French Language Services Commissioner will evolve and what powers it has. Our power now is to make recommendations and to follow up on the implementation of these recommendations. I've made a number of recommendations over the 3 years that I've held this position, and what I've seen is that recommendations actually do have a real weight behind them. The government does listen to us. The government does indeed implement measures to deal with the challenges faced by French Francophones in the province. Well, as My role is more one of persuading people and organizations. I have experience around linguistic rights, and thus far I think that we have indeed achieved real things. Some people might say, well, what is the point of all this if there are no penalties for ministries and bodies who don't uphold the law? What's really important for me are plans. Let's start with plans and performance measures. And this is what I've been proposing since I took office. Plans are the sinews of war. And if we don't have plans, we won't really be able to make any progress and to set out clearly what the government is planning to do to deal with the question of financial resources, human resources, technological resources, those needed to provide a service, and to constantly review performance in relation to these plans. So this is really key to measuring what progress is being made or not being made. As required, we'll see what types of additional powers might be useful for the French Language Services Commissioner in the province. We do have some journalists online over the telephone. Could you answer their questions? The next question is from Émilie Pelletier from the Le Droit newspaper. Good morning, Madam Commissioner. Can you hear me? Good morning, Émilie. How are things? Fine, thank you. I'd just like to quickly come back to the whole matter of Regulation 398/93. How is it that the regulation has not been updated in accordance with the French Language Services Act? There's all this talk of modernization, there's talk of modernizing all regulations. It's kind of surprising that that needs to be done. Shouldn't that be done anyway? Yes, well, the whole legislative framework is being modernized. The modernizing act, their bill was tabled last December. We've seen the modernization to 298.11 around third parties, and there's a whole there's a regulation 544 which further defines active offer. And I'm very grateful for the measures that have been taken in relation to active offer. And now, though we are expecting the other relevant regulations to be modernized as well. Are there other regulations in the law that have not been updated, and should we expect other regulations to be for recommendations to modernize? All regulations related to the French Language Services Act should be modernized, should be updated. And what I see in government is that it does recognize that these regulations, the relevant acts, do have to be modernized around linguistic rights. At first glance, I have indeed seen important improvements. Your next question is from Bienvenue Senga at Radio-Canada. Good morning, Madam Burke. Back to the question of Laurentian University. In your report last March, you put forward 19 recommendations. Today, you've given examples to illustrate progress, but many people who follow this would like to know where things stand, generally speaking. How many of recommendations have seen work done on them, and what is your impression of the pace at which this work is being done? Well, the report was tabled this March, and 19 recommendations in the report that we tabled. The last recommendation number 19, which recommends that the bodies affected by the investigation should provide progress reports. We've received a first progress report the first report was in September, 6 months after the tabling of our report, and the progress report has to do with the three main themes of the recommendations that I put forward. Firstly, the question of communication and the failures of communication that took place between the affected ministries and Laurentian universities. Secondly, a consultation on the obligations that flow from the Act. And thirdly, accountability and how important the designations are. And indeed, there 6 months after our report was tabled, there was a first progress report with genuine progress reported. Just to follow up on the question my colleague asked, there was a whole question of a recommendation around diplomas and qualifications. Has any progress been made around diplomas and qualifications with respect to the requirements around designation? One of the recommendations I made is that there has to be clear definition of what we mean by designation. Is it partial designation? Is it complete designation? The different agencies and organizations should always be very clear about what obligations they have to comply with. Up to the present day, there's this whole question of the rigor, the expectations of the measures that go hand in hand with the designation, and the question of services designated at Laurentian University. And on this front, there was ambiguity around diplomas and programs. The important thing is that the decisions made around the cut programs were devastating. The impact was devastating, and this has to be addressed frontally. Thank you. If any journalists on the phone have questions, please indicate your wish to ask a question. We have a journalist from TFO. Good morning. I'd like to come back to the recommendations, the total number of recommendations that were resolved. You have set out a deadline, September 30th, 2023, for updating Regulation 3993. Couldn't you provide a deadline for all the other recommendations? Well, so there are. Let's start with the two recommendations that were implemented, and based on what I saw yesterday, there are clear signs that other recommendations have also been addressed. We have to give the government some time to implement plans that I recommended on April 1st, 2022, with the tabling of the report from the Ministry of Francophone Affairs regarding the ministry's activities. I was hopeful that the plans would be part of the report she tabled, and what I have seen are positive signs that the plan is indeed being drafted, and given this affects 3 ministries, I think I've provided enough time for the development of plans. It's been 2 years now. I've pointed this out to the government, and I do so regularly, that I'm expecting their plans. Everything is based on these plans, including the fact that the minister has to be accountable for the quality of services. So a plan with a linguistic compass, identifying performance measures, all this is really essential. And these plans should be submitted. 2 years is more than enough time to draft these plans, to develop plans, to show me that all this is being taken seriously, quickly, on healthcare In the report, you say that we need standards around French language services in the healthcare system, that we should know if that's the preferred language of patients. Is this standard necessary? Is it mandatory? And should it be provided hand in hand with the active offer that Madame Mulroney talked about yesterday? In the healthcare sector, I've often said that this is a sector that this is often where complaints come in around. And one of the problems is just a lack of workforce, the workforce shortage to provide the service in French. And around I think the active offer will change things, and that the active offer has been included in the new regulation. And so I expect that the government will address the question of hiring French language staff, including in the healthcare sector. One thing we saw during the pandemic, which was in the headlines every day, healthcare is obviously essential for Francophones as it is for the rest of the population. My expectation is that service should be up to snuff, and I've said this many times to the government. Do we still have some time? I'd just like to clarify with respect to your plans. Your recommendation in the recommendation from 2019-2020 had to do with the fact that the French Language Services Act obliged the Deputy Minister to report, be accountable to the Executive Council regarding the availability of French language services, that had to draft a plan in which these obligations are spelled out. So basically what I'm trying to understand is, what are the specific obligations, the concrete obligations of ministries in accordance with the French language services in terms of what they have to provide or not. So let's start with the Act, as you said. So the measure that has to do with accountability for the minister to be accountable every year around the implementation of the law and the quality of services provided by their ministry. And what's important for me is to see that ministries should be given the powers, given the wherewithal to be accountable, to assess the quality of services in their ministry. And what I suggest is that plans should be developed, plans that identify the human, financial, and technological resources that are necessary so that the service can indeed be provided. All the more so, given that that really most of the complaints we receive have to do with workforce issues. So really, the workforce should be front and center, and include the linguistic compass include these in the plans and make them part of your evaluation measures. Are services available at all time? Are services of quality measures? Is the relevant Francophone, is the Francophone person happy, satisfied with the service that they've received? And so I ask that these criteria should be incorporated when such plans are being developed. This was my recommendation last year. Just as a follow-up question, maybe I missed something, but does the commissioner send a guide to ministries to help them draft such plans? And I actually wondered about this myself when I made the recommendation, and I think it's essential to enable the government to determine how they plan on developing these plans. I think, of course, that the Ministry of Francophone Affairs has a central role to play to set out the parameters, and then each ministry should have the freedom to adapt this model to their own specific requirements within their respective ministry. So your balance sheet of the past 3 years, you feel that things are going well, that there's a real openness to improving French language services. Professor, you said this, but what do you think is the Achilles heel of the government when it comes to offering services? It has to do with planning or knowledge of its obligations under French language services. Like, what's its Achilles heel? Its weakness. I think what's important, like I've said, that plans are really essential. Everything flows from plans. And although I have heard that plans are being developed, but as long as I don't have a plan in hand, that's a real problem. That's the main problem. The whole idea of active offer, and I've seen that the whole idea of active offer has been incorporated, and this has really been embraced, and that highlights the need for implementation of plans with performance measures. And I recommend that the government really has to embrace the new regulation and implementation, and also ways to measure whether the active offer is a reality or not. When have you really had to bang your fist on the table? I haven't. The cooperation with the civil service has been excellent, and with the government. I have heard that plans are being developed. I also recognize that it takes time to develop plans. We've gone through a pandemic. There was an election. 2 years plus. I think it's been more than enough time now to develop that. Plans should have been developed. I was really delighted to see the proposal of active offer, but now we really need plans, and we really need implementation, and we need to wait to see how these plans will be assessed. But do you take that really seriously? It's very easy to say, well, the plans are being drafted, they'll come out sooner or later. Do you think they're being serious? What I've seen from the Ministry of Francophone Affairs is the tabling of a strategy around French language services. The minister included this in her plan for this year. In the report, there are three central focus areas, and what I see is that within the main priorities, one finds planning, and so I'm confident that these matters are being taken seriously. The other main priority is modernizing the Act. The modernization has taken place. We're now seeing regulations are being updated. Planning is part of this in the report, and the planning that the government is looking at. So yeah, I'm confident, but it's been 24 months. So these are annual plans. You want annual plans, and the ministry has to show how it plans to implement the law. No, it's really up to the act. No, it's really up to the ministries. How much time they plan to assess. But yes, we do need reports, and we need annual performance measures. So we need to kind of feedback. You're asking for feedback about the past, or reports about the past, but also plans for the future from each ministry. My way of seeing things in practice is that the ministry should table a report. For the first time, following my recommendation, there was indeed a report that was submitted within this framework. My expectation that plans should be included, and that she should be updating around implementation and the quality of service based on what the other ministries tell her about implementation and the quality of service, because in the Act, it's ministers who are accountable. And so there's a range of ministries that fall under the purview of the Act, and the Act actually involves shared responsibility in terms of implementation and evaluation. Perhaps one last question, one final question. You've raised the whole question of new powers. I hadn't heard that before. Are you suggesting that there should be changes to grant new powers to the Commissioner? No, I don't want to give you that impression. All I'm saying is that the position of the Commissioner is set out as it is, and our influence is a persuasive one through recommendations, and all my recommendations have been accepted, and little by little they are indeed being implemented as well. That's all. That's the only information I have to answer your question. Thank you, Madam Burke. Thank you.